The first alert came at 2:14 p.m., a single vibration against the glass tabletop of the conference room, a quiet pulse, almost polite. I glanced down at my phone, half listening as the client droned about scalability metrics. One unread notification blinked on the screen. ChronoLog security alert. Unauthorized login detected. Workstation. Leah Lane 041. My workstation. At first I told myself it was nothing. A system glitch, maybe IT running a patch. But then another notification appeared. Then another. 3 in total. 3 separate logins, all from my terminal, all within minutes. I looked up at my reflection in the glass partition, a calm, dark silhouette framed by downtown light. My expression didn't move. Years in compliance teach you one thing. Panic is loud, but proof is silent. So I smiled. I nodded at something the client said about timelines, pretending to make a note on my tablet. In reality, I was already tracing the chain in my mind. My workstation wasn't just another desktop. It was the control hub for ChronoLog, the audit system I designed. The same system that recorded every access, every export, every deletion across the entire corporate network. If someone was in my files, it meant one of two things: incompetence or intent. And intent always leaves fingerprints. The meeting dragged on. I answered questions with mechanical precision, my voice calm while my mind spiraled through possibilities. The CFO's sudden request for data alignment last week, the HR director's oddly warm smile in the elevator, and yesterday's conversation with my boss, the one that ended with him saying, "Don't overcomplicate things, Leah. Not everything needs a paper trail." That's when I knew. The pattern was too neat, the timing too clean. They weren't checking compliance, they were clearing it. When the meeting adjourned, I gathered my notes slowly, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Outside, the winter wind sliced down Lexington Avenue. I didn't rush. The taxi line moved like molasses, every second giving them more rope. In the back seat, I unlocked my secure tablet and opened ChronoLog's mirror interface. Rows of digital activity lit up, all green, all live. Each event had a name, an ID, a timestamp, my name, my ID, my timestamp. Except I wasn't there. Someone was impersonating my credentials, accessing my compliance drives, and extracting restricted audit archives, the kind tied to our federal contracts, the kind that trigger automatic off-site replication to my private vault if tampered with. I leaned back against the seat, heartbeat steady. The driver asked if the address was correct. I nodded. Yes. Back to headquarters. Outside, the city blurred into streaks of chrome and sleet. Inside, my mind was already compartmentalizing. Evidence chain, escalation route, legal fallback. If they wanted a ghost to blame, I would let them, but the system would remember who crossed the line first. When I reached the lobby, my ID badge flickered red. No access. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes. "IT is updating the security grid," she said, voice brittle with practiced apology. "Of course," I said softly, stepping aside. I watched the elevator doors close on 2 executives carrying sealed folders. One of them, the compliance director I trained 5 years ago. She didn't look at me. Back outside, I exhaled once into the cold. The wind bit through my coat, sharp as truth. I pulled out my phone again. The ChronoLog dashboard pulsed one more time. Export event detected, 1426. The line glowed red, alive and irreversible. They thought I was gone for the day. They thought my system was sleeping. But ChronoLog never sleeps. And neither do I. Patterns don't announce themselves. They sit quietly under the noise, waiting for you to shut up and listen. I didn't go home. I walked 3 blocks past headquarters, past the glass that used to reflect my badge back at me like a promise, and slipped into a lobby espresso bar that smelled like citrus cleaner and burnt ambition. I took the corner stool near the outlet, ordered tea I wouldn't drink, and opened the mirrored portal to ChronoLog. The dashboard breathed awake. Cool blues, thin lines, data marching with the composure of a well-run infantry. On the left, a timeline. On the right, my favorite view, event lattice, a quiet snare that threads badge pings, workstation logins, network mounts, and door camera motion into a single, tamper-evident braid. The thing about truth is it rarely arrives as a quote. It arrives as geometry. 1417, door A19, my hallway, accepted a master badge, not mine. 1418, camera 12 registered movement. The facial vector matched unknown probable, internal. 1420, Leah Lane 041, session established via my credential token, IP mapped to an IT jump box. 1422, Directory, Compliance, Investigations, DOE 2023 Q4 opened. Hash check flagged. 1426. Export attempt to removable media. Endpoint agent reports device. Unregistered. I tapped the export line and the lattice unfurled, delicate as a spider web, spanning out to 3 IDs. The CFO's executive assistant, badge, the compliance director, terminal presence, and an IT lead I once coached through a failed SOC 2 readiness. Their names didn't matter yet. The choreography did. It was rehearsed. I thumbed back through the week. The small tells I ignored while answering to-do lists made by people who forgot the difference between policy and preference. The CFO's alignment chat. 10 minutes of innocuous questions wrapped around one precise ask. Are we required to maintain independent copies of whistleblower audits? I'd smiled and said, yes. The HR director's hallway warmth, all peppermint and apology. We're sunsetting certain redundancies, she'd said, as if integrity could be line-itemed. And yesterday, my boss with the soft hands and sharp calendar. Don't overcomplicate this, Leah. They weren't asking. They were casing. I deepened the view. ChronoLog doesn't rely on faith. It writes its own affidavit. Each event is hashed on write, SHA-256, then anchored to a worm vault, then echoed to an off-site node under our federal subcontract. If you touch anything under the DOE tree, the system notarizes the moment, time zones and all, like a clerk who never blinks. A new alert breathed onto the screen, soft as a tide. ChronoLog. Integrity drift detected. Source, /compliance/investigations/DOE/2023 Q4/findings_draft_V7.docx. Discrepancy. Modified outside allowed process. Chain status. Preserved. Mirronded. They hadn't just opened my files. They had edited a draft summary. Sloppy, but useful. Editorial fingerprints are far more revealing than theft. Deletion erases. Revision confesses. I cued the delta compare, my V7 against their new V7. The red lines painted themselves. A softened phrase here. Pattern of misstatements to isolated deviation. An entire finding demoted from high to moderate. Footnote citations stripped of docket references. The legal equivalent of bleaching a bloodstain and calling it a spill. I took notes by hand, not because I don't trust my system, but because paper has a different kind of gravity in a hearing. 1422, access. 1424, edit. 1426, export. I underlined once. Twice. Then I did nothing. Restraint is a tool, You don't interrupt a thief while he's inventorying your proofs. You let him perform his certainty in front of the cameras he forgot about. The barista announced last call. The espresso machine sighed like a tired animal. Outside, the city rinsed itself in sleet. I opened the access graph, a narrow, merciless map of who touched what, mapped against their permissible scopes. The IT lead's jump box session wrote in on a service account that temporarily carries my scope during patch windows. Documented, yes. Authorized for this purpose, no. The compliance director's presence plausibly deniable. No direct keystrokes, just proximity and observing. The master badge? Executive access born in another building, provisioned yesterday with a backdated justification string that read, Records Consolidation. I scrolled to exceptions. 2 weeks ago, my audit of the CFO's vendor spend had flagged unreconciled payments to a Delaware LLC with all the personality of a cutout. No website, no employees, just a mouth for money. The draft finding was the one they'd softened to moderate. Of course it was. I checked the Mirror Vault, our off-site immutable copy governed by the subcontract's retention requirements. Green across the board. Each tainted edit captured, each original preserved, block signatures countersigned by the independent key custodian I hand-picked precisely to keep me honest. If I disappeared tomorrow, the data would still testify. A message pinged the side of my screen. Calendar invite. Confidential review. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. HR, legal, my boss. Attachment. Interim suspension notice. Draft. I let the screen dim. A woman 2 stools down laughed into her scarf. Her phone flashed a photo of a dog in boots. Ordinary life continued, mercifully unaware. I sent one email. To myself, to counsel, BCC to the offsite archive, with nothing attached but a subject line that has saved more careers than outrage ever has. Subject, hold notice, preservation of evidence, ChronoLog, event set A19-L041. Body, notice of potential litigation hold, do not alter or destroy related materials. Not a threat, a bell. Once rung, it's hard to pretend you never heard it. I closed the laptop. In the glass door, I caught my reflection again. Same coat, same hair, same calm face I learned to wear when rooms forget who keeps them honest. My fingers were steady. My tea had gone cold. Back on the sidewalk, the night felt thinner, like the city had been sketched instead of built. I tucked my hands into my pockets and let the pattern settle into a shape I could hold. 3 actors, 1 motive. A timeline tight enough to hum. They'd written me as the villain. Tomorrow, I'd introduce them to their author. At 8:59 a.m., I would walk into their confidential review with nothing but a sealed envelope and the quiet certainty of a system that cannot lie. And at 9:01, I would ask a single question that would change the temperature of the room. By morning, the air outside headquarters felt too still, too measured, like the city was holding its breath with me. I stood at the revolving doors for a second longer than necessary, watching the stream of employees badge in without hesitation. Mine didn't. The light blinked red, then again. The security guard avoided my eyes. "Probably a reset issue," he said. His voice was polite, rehearsed. I'd used that same tone hundreds of times when explaining a procedural failure I didn't believe. I smiled the way auditors do when they already know the answer. "Of course," I said. "Happens all the time." He nodded but didn't lift the gate. There it was, the confirmation. I wasn't just locked out. I'd been removed. They'd moved faster than I expected. A formal review at 9, but they'd revoked my physical access by 8. Efficient, I'll give them that. I walked to the cafe across the street. Same corner seat, same lemon disinfectant smell. It was too early for the barista to judge why a woman in a navy suit was nursing black coffee and typing like she was disarming a bomb. ChronoLog was already awake before I touched the keyboard. Event update, new access violation, 07:42 a.m. Unauthorized attempt to disable audit node L.Lane 041 mirror. Origin, internal IT administration account. They were trying to shut down the mirror. And by doing so, they triggered the Federal Safeguard Clause, something I had built for exactly this scenario. Every file under a government subcontract, once touched by an unauthorized hand, automatically duplicated itself to the department's compliance cloud, complete with access credentials, IP logs, and the digital signatures of whoever initiated the attempt. They hadn't just broken into my files. They'd committed a breach of federal contract. I watched the timestamps unfold like dominoes. 7:42. IT logs into my mirror vault. 7:43. Attempted deactivation of sync service. 7:44. Automatic escalation. Tier 1 security event. DOE linked. 7:45. Notification sent to legal liaison, external. 7:46. Alert acknowledged by the Department of Energy's oversight mailbox. It was done. In 4 minutes, the trap had snapped shut. I didn't celebrate. I took a slow breath and opened the review calendar invite. HR, legal, my boss, David. The subject line looked harmless. Discussion on recent data integrity concerns. I glanced at the attached PDF. Interim suspension notice, draft. That word, draft, was everything. They hadn't finalized it yet, meaning the decision wasn't clean. They were testing the water, seeing how scared I'd be. That was their first mistake. Fear leaves fingerprints. At 8:45, I crossed the street again. The guard stiffened, radio crackling faintly as he said my name. I waited, unbothered, until a junior HR associate arrived, smile plastic, voice trembling. Leah, if you'll follow me, please. They took me through the side door, symbolic segregation disguised as formality. The conference room they led me to was staged, a pitcher of untouched water, 3 empty glasses, the blinds half closed. David sat at the head, his tie crooked, a stack of folders in front of him like shields. Leah, he began, feigning concern. We're investigating irregularities in our audit data. It appears some sensitive documents were accessed and modified from your credentials. We just want to understand what happened. My eyes flicked to the folders, my reports, printed, highlighted, rearranged into whatever version they needed me to own. I folded my hands. You're saying I modified the documents? David cleared his throat. We're not accusing anyone. We just need transparency. That word, transparency, always means concealment is already in motion. I leaned forward slightly, calm. Then I assume you'll want the system logs. I brought a copy. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. David's jaw tightened. Inside was nothing explosive, just a notarized hash list from ChronoLog verifying every event under my ID. But the gesture alone was enough to shift the temperature. Those are restricted internal records, the legal counsel said. How did you obtain them? I met her eyes. By writing the system that generated them. Silence. The HR rep stopped pretending to take notes. I continued, voice steady, surgical. ChronoLog is a federal-grade compliance tool. Every file under DOE subcontracting falls under audit preservation policy. That includes metadata, logins, exports, edits, deletions. When unauthorized access occurs, the system escalates automatically to the department's oversight cloud. The counsel blinked. You mean you reported this externally? No, I said softly. You did. At 7:44 this morning. David's pen slipped from his fingers. The sound of it hitting the table was absurdly loud. I pushed the envelope toward him. That's the audit log for the last 48 hours. I suggest you check 14:22 yesterday and 7:42 today. Both show non-compliant credentials. Your service accounts. The silence changed shape. No longer defensive, but frightened. I stood, smoothing my jacket. If you need further clarification, I'm sure our federal liaison will be in touch. Leah, David said, his voice cracking slightly. Let's not escalate this. I looked at him the way one looks at a locked door that was once an exit. It's already escalated. You just didn't notice when. I walked out before they could reply. Outside, the morning was bright, indifferent. I crossed the street back to the cafe, my reflection trailing me in the window's glare. The system didn't just record what they did, it recorded how fast they panicked after doing it. And panic, in the language of compliance, is just another metric waiting to be measured. Tomorrow, the audit logs would start speaking for themselves. By noon, the memo went out, a company-wide email wrapped in neutral language and corporate anesthesia. Effective immediately, an internal investigation is underway regarding unauthorized disclosures of sensitive compliance material. We ask all employees to refrain from speculating or sharing unverified information. I didn't need to scroll to the bottom to know who was copied. Every senior director, every department head, and me. They'd made it official. I was the ghost in their story. The name whispered, not printed. The cautionary tale for anyone who asked too many questions. I closed the message without reading it twice. No anger, no surprise. I'd seen this tactic before. You discredit the auditor before the audit. It's elegant in its simplicity. Strip a woman of credibility, and you've already rewritten the evidence. But this time, they picked the wrong author. At 1:04 p.m., I got a text from an old friend in legal. You didn't hear it from me, but they've scheduled a board-level call tomorrow. Topic: DOE breach. I stared at the phone for a long moment. The irony was almost poetic. The same system they had tried to erase had already reported their cleanup attempt as a federal breach. I opened ChronoLog's secondary interface, the one reserved for cross-agency reporting. The timeline unfurled like a confession. 7:42. IT access attempt, node L041-mirror. 7:44. Escalation, DOE oversight alert. 7:45. Federal copy initialized. 9:12. Legal department remote access denied, security lock. 10:32. Internal communication draft suspension opened by HR. 12:03. Corporate memo issued. Every event tied together with quiet precision. ChronoLog wasn't a system anymore. It was a witness. By evening, the office had turned into an echo chamber of polite dread. Former colleagues texted half-hearted support. Hope it's all a misunderstanding. Translation: we saw your name, we're keeping our distance. I didn't blame them. Fear is contagious in corporate corridors. It spreads faster than truth. Instead of defending myself, I focused on documenting. A clean chain of custody, every event notarized, encrypted, mirrored. The system didn't care about office politics. It only cared about verifiable sequence. That's what made it dangerous. It couldn't be coached. The next morning, a courier arrived at my apartment with a package. No sender, just a cream envelope with the company seal embossed in silver. Inside, a single sheet of paper labeled Request for Data Cooperation. They wanted me to voluntarily provide access to my personal backups and ChronoLog node for clarification and transparency. I almost laughed. They were trying to gain control of the system again, dress it in policy, pretend it was voluntary. The problem was they'd already lost control the moment they tried to tamper with the audit chain. I signed the acknowledgement receipt, but not the consent form. Then I placed a call. Office of Corporate Oversight, Department of Energy. My voice was calm, deliberate. This is Leah Lane, former compliance architect under subcontract 8821-A. I believe your alert system received an automated escalation from my company's node yesterday morning. A pause, then. Yes, ma'am. ChronoLog, correct? We're reviewing the incident now. Good, I said. You'll find the mirrored logs self-contained. No need for further access on my end. I'd just like to confirm chain integrity. Integrity confirmed, the voice replied. Your system's documentation is exemplary. You'll likely hear from legal liaison soon. Understood, I said. Please route all communication through counsel. The call lasted less than 3 minutes, but in compliance time, that was enough to shift an empire. That afternoon, I took a walk. Midtown was drenched in the kind of rain that makes the whole world reflective. Buildings shimmered, the sidewalks mirrored the sky, and the city felt like one enormous audit log. Everything recorded, nothing truly erased. Inside the glass of every window, I caught my reflection in pieces. Calm, composed. Someone who looked like a woman accused, but moved like a woman already exonerated. Back home, my inbox blinked with a new subject line, urgent, legal review, board meeting prep. I opened it. The entire email thread between the CFO, compliance director, and IT head had been accidentally attached. Their words, tidy and desperate. If the DOE confirms Leah's escalation, we'll need to demonstrate she acted independently. Our internal findings must show unauthorized conduct. She built the system. Can we argue misuse of federal tech? No, the patent filing lists her as primary author. Ownership's clean. Then we need narrative alignment. Make it emotional, stress, burnout, overreach. Something human. My lips parted in a quiet exhale. They weren't managing a breach. They were scripting a story. I forwarded the thread to my counsel with a short note. They're attempting to construct motive. The logs show the opposite. Proceed as discussed. Then I sat back and closed my laptop. The beauty of truth in systems like mine isn't in revelation. It's in sequence. Each lie they told would arrive too late, time-stamped against the one machine in their world that didn't know how to forget. They had framed me as reckless, but what they really built was a frame made of glass. And the moment the light shifted, it would show only one reflection. Theirs. Tomorrow, the board would see it for themselves. The board call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:45, every senior executive was already seated in the conference room, stiff-backed and over-caffeinated, their eyes flicking between the table speaker and the corporate counsel dialing in from D.C. I didn't join them. I was invited, but not expected. That was the point. I sat in a quiet co-working suite across town, an empty mug beside my laptop, a single document open on screen. Board-prepared evidence package. ChronoLog sequence 1417 to 0746. My name wasn't on the file, but my fingerprints were everywhere. Across the glass wall, a delivery drone passed by the skyline. its reflection gliding over my face like a ghost. I pressed record on my phone, not for drama, just habit. Auditors document instinctively. At 9:02, my counsel texted a single word: live. The board meeting had begun. I could imagine the opening script by heart, the CFO explaining process gaps, the compliance director feigning surprise, HR calling it a difficult situation, the usual choreography of plausible deniability. But ChronoLog was already in the room with them. Every access attempt they'd made, every deletion, every edit, they were all linked to individual accounts, immutable and mirrored, and the department's legal liaison had received the full chain that morning, complete with verification certificates. I didn't need to defend myself. I just needed to give them enough time to commit to the lie. At 9:16, the first email arrived from an executive assistant on the 20th floor. They're presenting redacted audit files to the board, claiming you altered them before escalation. They don't realize the originals are time-stamped externally. I smiled faintly. They were so predictable it almost felt impersonal, like watching a simulation run its course. I replied with one line: let them finish the presentation before 9:30, because at 9:31 the system would speak. ChronoLog's federal synchronization ran on a fixed 24-hour cycle, mirrored copies automatically verified against the prior day's log. And this morning, that verification included the one thing they had tried to erase: their own access attempt. At exactly 9:31, the board's shared display would refresh with a compliance notification they couldn't override. Integrity drift alert. Unregistered administrative access detected on 0742 a.m. by internal credentials. Compliance risk escalated. Chain locked for external review. They would see the message in red, unambiguous, self-authenticating. No commentary needed. At 9:37, my counsel called. They froze the presentation mid-slide, he said. The system pushed an external verification banner to every board terminal. They're asking where it came from. ChronoLog, I said. Obviously, he replied dryly. The DOE counsel's on the line. They want to confirm you're cooperating. I'm available, I said. Always have been. A pause. You're enjoying this, aren't you? No, I said softly. I'm just relieved it's finally visible. At 10 o'clock, the company's internal Slack channels went quiet. Too quiet. That was how you knew the story had shifted from rumor to fact. When people stop typing, it means they're listening for consequences. By noon, the CFO's calendar went blank. The compliance director's email auto-response appeared. On indefinite leave. And IT? They were instructed to audit the auditor, not realizing the command itself would be logged as another violation. I didn't touch a thing. I let the architecture do what it was built to do: preserve truth without bias. At 4 p.m., my counsel forwarded a formal statement from the board's independent legal representative. Following discovery of additional compliance anomalies, the company has initiated a full third-party review. Ms. Lane is requested to provide technical guidance to facilitate data restoration. That was their elegant way of saying, come back, but under our terms. I replied with a single attachment, a short letter titled Conditional Cooperation Agreement. Clause 1. All consultation to be conducted through independent counsel. Clause 2. Restoration work billed at federal contractor rate. Clause 3. Written public exoneration prior to engagement. Clause 4. Immediate termination of all personnel linked to ChronoLog tampering events. 10 minutes later, the board accepted all terms. It's always fascinating how fast impossible becomes approved when the system stops bending to will. I shut down my laptop, exhaled through my teeth, and looked out the window. The city glowed, neon threads in the fog, alive, precise. For the first time in weeks, I felt the static drain from my chest. Not victory, something quieter. Completion. They had tried to dismantle my credibility, to erase my work, to write me out of the narrative. And yet every key they pressed, every door they opened without permission, became another sentence in the story they didn't know they were authoring. At 9:31, the system had spoken for me. I didn't need to raise my voice. Tomorrow, I'd step back into the building not as the accused, but as the architect. The quiet trap was complete. By Monday morning, the building had changed temperature, not literally. The thermostat still hummed its usual bureaucratic 72 degrees, but atmospherically. Silence had moved in, the kind that feels engineered, cautious, too rehearsed to be coincidence. Every door I passed opened a little slower. Conversations hushed mid-sentence. Even the receptionist avoided eye contact, as though proximity alone might tag her in the metadata. It was the sound of a company realizing its story no longer belonged to it. They'd reinstated my badge. Quietly. No announcement, no apology, just a blinking green light and a muttered, "Welcome back." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My return wasn't personal. It was procedural. The board had approved my temporary consultation to help restore the system, as if ChronoLog were just another piece of tech gone rogue. They didn't yet understand. ChronoLog couldn't be restored. It could only be obeyed. I walked to my old office. The air smelled different, sharp, metallic, like static after lightning. My desk had been rifled through, papers rearranged with the care of someone trying too hard to pretend they hadn't looked. I powered on the terminal. The boot sequence was pristine. My script had rejected every foreign change. The logs began to load, neat as surgical incisions. 7:44. DOE liaison access verified. 8:12. Independent legal observer connected. 8:34. Internal credentials, CFO, IT, compliance director, locked, pending inquiry. 8:36. Account dlang/finance_lead, attempted unauthorized log recovery. 8:36:02. Access denied. Evidence preserved. I exhaled once, slowly. The pattern was unfolding exactly as I predicted. At 9, the CEO summoned me to the executive conference room. He looked tired, not the fatigue of work, but the erosion of control. The CFO's chair was empty. HR sat 2 seats down, hands folded, eyes fixed on a point somewhere near her lap. "Leah," he began, voice careful, "we appreciate your assistance. We're all trying to move forward, but the current situation has escalated. DOE's internal audit has expanded to include our executive actions. They're requesting full transparency." I nodded once. "They're following protocol." He cleared his throat. "They also want ChronoLog's entire event chain, including board communications. That data includes privileged conversations, preliminary drafts, things not meant for external review."
"Then those shouldn't have been stored in a compliance network," I said. The CEO winced.
"We were unaware your system captured that level of detail."
"You signed the design brief," I said evenly. "Page 3 outlines the continuous capture policy. You called it over-engineering." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I let the silence stretch. It's remarkable what silence can do in rooms built on performance. Finally, he said, "What do you need from us to resolve this?" "Nothing," I said. "It's already resolving itself." By noon, the unraveling began in earnest. The department's liaison sent a formal notice confirming receipt and verification of unaltered audit records. A polite euphemism for, "We have the evidence, and it's bad." Within an hour, internal communications leaked. Fragments of the CFO's emails debating how to soften findings and control exposure. No one needed to guess the source. The system had automatically copied the messages to all users listed under the Integrity Oversight Group. That list included half the board. And me. By late afternoon, I walked through the executive floor again. The walls felt thinner. Phones rang unanswered. In one office, a lawyer whispered the word indictable. In another, someone wept quietly over a spreadsheet. When I reached the break room, Darla was there, my old mentee, the one I told to stay, observe. She looked up, eyes wide. "You knew this was going to happen." "I suspected," I said. "They're saying the system can't be stopped, that it keeps sending reports automatically." I sipped my coffee. "That's true. It's autonomous. It mirrors itself until an external authority concludes the case." Her voice lowered. "They're terrified of you." I met her gaze, steady. "They shouldn't be. I didn't build it to punish."
I built it so no one would ever have to prove what was already true. Darla nodded, understanding flickering across her face like the first spark of something dangerous. Or liberating. At 6:45, my counsel called again. "The board's legal firm just withdrew representation," he said. "Conflict of interest." "And the DOE?" I asked. "They're impressed. Your audit trail's airtight. They're recommending you for the External Compliance Council once this is over." I looked out the window. The city glowed in layered golds like molten glass. The company below me, that monument of arrogance and spreadsheets, was collapsing not from exposure, but from its own reflection. ChronoLog didn't destroy them. It just stopped them from lying. At 7:02, the system chimed softly. ChronoLog event update. Final compliance sequence transmitted. Case file locked pending closure. A small line of text, almost tender. Integrity restored. I leaned back in my chair. The hum of the office behind me had faded into silence. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut for the last time. The unraveling was complete. Not with explosions or headlines, but with the quiet elegance of truth asserting itself. Line by line. Timestamp by timestamp. They had built their power on invisibility. I built a system that refused to look away. And now, for the first time in years, the record was clean. 3 days later, the conference room on the 32nd floor smelled of metal and panic. The board called it a transition briefing. The department called it an intervention. 2 government liaisons occupied the far side of the table. Neat suits, legal pads, calm efficiency. The rest of the room fidgeted behind polite smiles that trembled at the edges. I'd been invited, again, this time formally. Not as the accused or even the consultant. The email had used a different title. Subject Matter Witness, System Integrity Review. I walked in quietly, set my binder on the table, and nodded once to the DOE counsel. Across from me sat the CEO, face pale, voice careful. To his right, the compliance director, stripped of confidence, hair pulled tight like restraint itself. The chair beside her was empty. The CFO had resigned for personal reasons, 48 hours earlier. No one mentioned the word resigned meant subpoenaed. The lead liaison began without preamble. ChronoLog's verification chain has been validated, she said. The system's data aligns with external records. No tampering detected on the claimant's side. Multiple unauthorized access events confirmed from internal executive credentials. She didn't look at me when she said claimant. She didn't need to. The CEO cleared his throat. We appreciate your thoroughness, but we believe there were misunderstandings around the system's scope. Scope? The liaison interrupted softly. You mean the scope you signed on page 3 of the design contract? His mouth opened, then closed. The silence was surgical. She continued, flipping through her notes. The department appreciates Ms. Lane's foresight in preserving an autonomous integrity chain. Without it, this investigation would have required subpoenas, third-party imaging, and likely litigation. Instead, we have a self-authenticating ledger, efficient, precise, incorruptible. Her words dropped like weights. The legal counsel beside me wrote nothing. She simply let the pause linger. The CEO turned to me finally. Leah, surely you understand this isn't good for anyone. The company's reputation, the livelihoods. I understand perfectly, I said. My tone was even, unremarkable. That's why I built ChronoLog, to protect what's real, not reputations, not optics, but truth. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. You could have come to me before escalating this externally. I met his gaze. You escalated it yourself. At 7:44 a.m., when your IT lead tried to disable the audit mirror. The system simply did what you asked it to do. Report a breach. The compliance director's pen snapped in her hand. The sound startled no one. The liaison shifted slightly, then read from the prepared document. Effective immediately, the department is suspending federal contracts with the company pending review. Further, Ms. Lane will serve as interim compliance liaison to ensure data continuity. It was a sentence that rewrote hierarchy in one breath. The CEO exhaled sharply. You're putting her in charge? The liaison's tone didn't waver. We're recognizing competence. It's rare these days. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I simply signed the acknowledgement form placed before me. The pen felt heavy, final. By afternoon, the news reached the rest of the building. Word travels fastest through the spaces silence can't fill. Elevators, cafeterias, Slack channels suddenly revived with cautious emojis. People didn't know whether to congratulate or avoid me. I gave them no signal either way. Justice, in my experience, loses its weight when celebrated too loudly. Instead, I walked one last circuit through the floor, the server room humming like an engine of memory. The hardware racks stood tall, cold, exact. My fingerprints were everywhere inside this infrastructure, in the code, in the architecture, in the quiet logic that refused to bend. I rested my hand against the glass. Good work, I whispered, not sure if I meant the system or myself. That evening, my counsel joined me in the lobby with a file under her arm. They're offering a settlement package, she said. Consulting retainer, NDA, 7 figures, plus full acknowledgement of contribution. And the clause? I asked. No restrictions on future testimony or publication. You're free to speak. I nodded slowly. Then it's not a settlement. It's closure. We stepped outside into the early dusk. The air carried the faint scent of rain and relief. On my phone, ChronoLog displayed its final notice. Event Series 8821-A, concluded. System status, dormant. All verified truths preserved. Case closed. I took a photo of the screen, not for evidence, but for memory. Proof that restraint, not vengeance, had carried the day. Later that night, I found myself standing by my apartment window, the city below pulsing with light. Each window another story, another secret waiting for a ledger strong enough to hold it. The world doesn't fall apart when truth arrives. It just rearranges itself to make space. I thought of the CEO, the director, the nameless IT lead, all architects of their own undoing. I felt no triumph, only symmetry. The reckoning wasn't mine to deliver. It had always belonged to the system, and I had simply built it to remember. The settlement wired at 6:02 a.m. on a Tuesday. Quiet, procedural, the way a door closes in an empty house. My counsel forwarded the executed agreement and a single sentence: all conditions satisfied. No victory laps, no headlines. The company accepted a federal monitorship, replaced its top floor with interim names, and adopted ChronoLog under a consent framework that made my old design brief read like scripture. I brewed coffee in the dark and watched the steam lift from the mug like a small, unimportant miracle. Somewhere in that building I used to call ours, they were memorizing new words: retention, chain of custody, immutability. Words I'd said in rooms that smiled and changed the subject. Now the words were policy. My phone chimed, a calendar reminder I'd kept out of habit. Quarterly review with David. I deleted it without emotion. On the same screen, another invite blinked from a different universe. Department of Energy. External Compliance Council orientation. I accepted. From my kitchen table in a sweatshirt, bare feet on cool tile. The appointment slid onto my calendar and sat there, small and exact, like a signature written in steady ink. Work found me without a pitch deck. Startups asked for truth by design. Mid-market firms wanted audits that weren't theater. I incorporated a new company with a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. Darla left quietly and joined as my first hire. She reads contracts with the patience of a watchmaker and smiles like a woman who's learned how not to apologize for being precise. We didn't sell software. We licensed a discipline. Our statements of work carried one page that mattered more than the others: Integrity Continuity Annex. It required any client relying on our architecture to fund an autonomous audit chain, notarized to a worm vault, mirrored to an external custodian we selected, not they. No temporary exceptions, no executive overrides. If they balked, we thanked them for their interest and sent a polite note to their board chair explaining why their roadmap was allergic to sunlight. A few returned weeks later. Most didn't. I slept fine either way. I declined interviews. Reporters prefer villains and saviors. I'm neither. When they asked for an angle, I offered a sentence that never made the cut. Good systems make whistleblowing redundant. They wanted drama. I wanted quiet repetition. We both got what we came for. The department invited me to speak once, off the record, to a room filled with government counsel, auditors, and a handful of young engineers whose faces held the same mixture of fury and hope I used to carry, like a second pulse. I told them the obvious thing people forget. You can't negotiate with physics. Treat integrity like physics. A log that cannot be edited is not a threat. It is a climate. People work differently in clean air. At night, I wrote. White papers, not memoirs. Designing for irreversibility. The geometry of evidence. Latency of lies in distributed systems. We open-sourced a thin layer that sits on top of any logging stack and does one job: notarize on write, mirror on touch, alarm on contradiction. It's less than 400 lines of code and more consequential than most speeches I've heard in boardrooms with the blinds half closed. Once, months later, I walked past the old building and saw my reflection braided with the lobby's light. The guard had changed. The receptionist had not. She mouthed high through the glass, a small human gesture inside a machine built for forgetting. I lifted a hand back. No bitterness rose. The architecture had done what architecture does when it's honest. It carried weight without commentary. I keep the first alert pinned to the top of my phone, not as a wound, but as a metronome. ChronoLog security alert. Unauthorized login detected. The hum I felt in that room, the instant before anyone else knew the story, had already chosen its ending. People tell themselves betrayal happens in a burst. It doesn't. It accumulates until it becomes sequence, and sequence becomes proof. Sometimes clients ask me whether I ever wish I'd fought louder. I tell them noise is a brief kind of heat. Systems are weather. Build for climate, and you won't need to storm. Darla printed a line from one of our briefs and taped it inside our office door, where only we see it on the way out. Integrity is not a policy. It's proof. I didn't write the line for effect. I wrote it the night they raided my office, when I watched the lattice draw itself in clean angles that would not bend to sentiment. We grew, carefully. I hired people who loved boredom the way surgeons love routine, as evidence that the body is working. We reward dot crossers and date stampers, people whose first instinct is to ask, "Where will this live when I'm gone?" The question changes how you hold a file. It changes how you hold power. On quiet mornings, I still sit in that corner cafe, the one with the lemon cleaner and the window that turns the street into a slow film. I drink the tea this time. I watch the door, not waiting for anyone, just inventorying the small discipline of continuing. The company that tried to write me out is a different name now, a different logo. The monitorship ended, the fines landed. Their new site promises radical transparency. I don't flinch at the phrase anymore. Marketing is weather, too. There's no revenge in any of this, not really. Just a correction of altitude, a return to breathable air. I lock my phone and gather my things. The screen goes dark, and for a second my face floats there, steady, unremarkable, as if I've just closed a file and put it where it belongs. I don't chase justice anymore. I build rooms where truth doesn't need permission to enter. And the record remembers.